paleobiology at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, where he has been since 2013. He studied geology at the University of Bristol, and later got his PhD from the University of Cambridge. He is a world expert in dinosaur evolution, particularly among the early Ornithischian dinosaurs, which are one of the largest group of herbivorous dinosaurs. Currently, his fieldwork is focusing on South Africa and the British Isles, but his research more broadly encompasses reptiles from the Mesozoic, as well as particularly the origins of dinosaurs and close relatives of the dinosaurs in the Triassic period, as well as large biodiversity changes on the landscape throughout the last 300 million years. And he's going to talk to us today about one of his research projects that involves our local Fruitadens dinosaur. So you're going to hear about some of the new research that has been going on and is still going on regarding this fun, miniature, and wonderfully weird little dinosaur in Western Colorado. As we go through the lecture, if you have questions that pop up, please throw those into the chat. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the lecture, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A where Dr. Butler will answer your questions. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Richard Butler.
Well, thank you very much, Julia, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm just going to share my screen on the presentation. Can everybody see that? Is that in full screen mode? Excellent. Okay, well, thank you again. What I want to do today is to talk a bit about I think a really exciting and bizarre group of dinosaurs, Heterodontosaurids, perhaps one of the more obscure groups of dinosaurs, but I'm sure familiar to many of you because of this animal, Fruitadens. And I'll talk a bit about the discovery and the naming of Fruitadens. And then I'll finish up towards the end of the talk talking about some new work on a new specimen of Heterodontosaurid dinosaur from South Africa that's due to come out, it's due to be published in a couple of weeks from now. So Heterodontosaurids are part of the Ornithischian group of dinosaurs, and Ornithischians are a large and very diverse group of dinosaurs. They were around throughout the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. Throughout that time, we see a very wide range of body sizes and morphologies, but we generally recognize 5 major groups of Ornithischians. So we have the ornithopod dinosaurs, which include the late Cretaceous duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, as well as various other groups from the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. We have the dome-headed dinosaurs, the pachycephalosaurs, typically found in the latest Cretaceous of North America and Asia. We have the armored dinosaurs, the ankylosaurs, present across much of the world through the middle Jurassic to the end of the Cretaceous. Stegosaurs, plated dinosaurs, of course, very common in the late Jurassic, but also persisting into the Cretaceous. And then the horned dinosaurs, the ceratopsians, very common particularly from North America during the Cretaceous. So we have this large diversity of Ornithischian dinosaurs, several hundred species known to date. And Ornithischians are all characterized by a very similar set of features across the skeleton. They were first recognized as a distinct group based upon the anatomy of the pelvis. So on the left of the screen here, we've got 2 images of dinosaur pelvis. You're looking at these from the right-hand side of the body. The pelvis in dinosaurs is made up of 3 distinct bones, the ilium, which is the bone that connects to the backbone, the pubis, and the ischial bone. And in most dinosaurs and in the primitive reptile condition, these 3 bones point in different directions from one another. So the pubis points forward towards the front of the animal, the ischium points backwards, and the ilium is at the top of the pelvis connecting to the backbone. And that's the primitive triradiate pattern. And that gives rise to the name Saurischia, which is a name that's given to the group of dinosaurs that includes the meat-eating theropod dinosaurs, the carnivorous theropod dinosaurs, and also the large, long-necked sauropod dinosaurs. In Ornithischian dinosaurs, by contrast, we have a different pattern of pelvic arrangement. And the pubis has moved posteriorly to lie alongside the ischium. So it points towards the back of the animal. And this is actually more similar to what we see in modern birds. Modern birds have a pelvis that is superficially similar to that of Ornithischian dinosaurs. And it gives rise to the name Ornithischian, which means bird-hipped. So that was the original distinction that was drawn between Ornithischians and other groups of dinosaurs way back in the 19th century by the British paleontologist Henry Govier-Seeley. There's also a range of other features that are very distinctive to Ornithischians within the skeleton. If we look at a skull of an early Ornithischian, so at the top right of the screen here, we have Fruitasaurus from the early Jurassic of South Africa. It has some features that are very different from other groups of dinosaurs. There are bones that are completely unique to Ornithischians within dinosaurs. So there is a bone within the eye socket here called the palpebral bone, which is really only found within Ornithischians. And there is another bone at the front of the lower jaw of Ornithischians called the predentary bone, which again is unique to this group. They also have a dentition, teeth that are very distinctive. So the bottom right of this screen here, you've got the teeth of Scutellosaurus, an early armored dinosaur from the early Jurassic of Arizona. And they have this characteristic leaf-like shape to them, similar to what you see in modern iguana today, but quite distinct from other groups of dinosaurs. And so this is something that this type of dentition characterizes early Ornithischian dinosaurs. It's modified in various ways in later members of the group. But one of the things that unites all Ornithischian dinosaurs is that they are herbivores, they're plant eaters. So they're very distinct as a group morphologically. One of the most obscure and in many ways controversial groups of Ornithischians are the Heterodontosaurids. This is a small group of Ornithischians that were first discovered in South Africa in the 1960s. What you can see on the screen here is a cast of an amazing complete skeleton of an animal called Heterodontosaurus, which is the first of this, the first member of this group to really be well understood and well characterized. Not the first to be named, but the first to be really described from good material. And so the original skeleton of Heterodontosaurus is a complete skeleton, including a beautiful complete skull, preserved in articulation. This is a small-bodied animal. This is probably just over 1 meter in length. So it's a small dinosaur. It has some very distinctive features. So it probably was bipedal, like many other early dinosaurs, but it does have quite long forelimbs. So you can see the arms here are quite long, and they have these very large hands with quite long curved claws that actually look much more like the hands of meat-eating dinosaurs, of theropod dinosaurs, than is typical for Ornithischian dinosaurs. There are a range of other bizarre features through the skeleton, and I'll show you a close-up of the skull in a second that shows some of those features. So as I said, this is Heterodontosaurus, first discovered in the 1960s in South Africa. There's now between 4 and 5 species of Heterodontosaurid known from the early Jurassic of South Africa, depending on which taxonomy you subscribe to. But certainly those include Heterodontosaurus, Abrictosaurus, Lycorinus, and Pegomastax. So minimum of 4 species, possibly more. All of them share this very similar body plan. They're all small body. They're all somewhere in the range of 1 to 1.5 meters in length. So in foot, that's about 4 foot in length. This slide is taken from a paper by Paul Sereno, published about 10 years ago, revising the anatomy of this group. And it shows the skull of Heterodontosaurus and then a fleshed out reconstruction of what that animal might have looked like in life above. And the skull is really completely unlike that of other Ornithischian dinosaurs in a number of ways. But probably the most distinctive feature that you can see right away are these fang-like caniniform teeth at the front of the lower jaw. So there's one at the front of each dentary bone at the front of the lower jaw, and then you have smaller but also fang-like caniniform teeth in the premaxillary bone on the upper jaw. And those are completely unlike the dentition we see in any other group of Ornithischian dinosaurs. It's They look much more like what we would see in carnivorous dinosaurs. But behind those teeth, we have this tightly packed battery of teeth in the dentary and the maxilla, and those are clearly teeth that were being used to grind down plants. So this is clearly, despite the fact that it has these fang-like teeth in the upper and lower jaws, a plant-eating dinosaur, or at least an animal that was eating plants for a significant proportion of the time. Maybe it was an omnivore. That's controversial. But it has these unusual fang-like teeth within its dentition. There are other features in the skull that are unusual. It might be a bit difficult to see, but there is a large boss on the jugal. So there's a large raised lump on the jugal, and you can see kind of the expression of that in the fleshed out soft tissue reconstruction as well. And if you look at the reconstruction, you can also see that it has these hair-like features over the back of the head and the neck region. And I'll show you in a subsequent slide what those are. And again, they're an unusual feature that's present in some, at least some Heterodontosaurids. So up until about 2000, all of the known species of Heterodontosaurid, the confirmed species of Heterodontosaurid, came from South Africa. Then in the early part of the 21st century, there was some work done on a dinosaur from the UK, from the Isle of Wight, from Dorset on the south coast of the UK, which was actually described back in the 19th century by Richard Owen, by one of the pioneers of early paleontology. He described this dinosaur based on jaw fragments from the earliest Cretaceous of the UK, which he named Echinodon. And this is one of the jaw fragments of Echinodon. You can see it's very small. So the scale bar here is 1 centimeter, about ½ inch in length. So these are really small jaws. And there's a number of individual isolated jaws like this preserved in the collections of the Natural History Museum in London, but we don't have any other parts of the skeleton really. We just have jaw fragments, but with some very nicely preserved dentition. So you can see this is a lower jaw, this is a dentary. You can see these really lovely preserved teeth. And Echinodon was very mysterious for quite a long time. It was clearly identified as being an Ornithischian dinosaur, but referred to various different groups of Ornithischian dinosaurs over 150 years of study. And it was only about 20 years ago that we really managed to establish that this is actually another Heterodontosaurid. Its dentition is somewhat different to the Heterodontosaurids from South Africa, but there is good evidence that this is a Heterodontosaurid from the early Cretaceous of the UK, and it is extremely small, smaller than the South African animals, probably an animal around 60, 70 centimeters in length, so just over 2 foot in length, but very, very poorly known. We've also had other discoveries of Heterodontosaurids in other parts of the world over the last 20 years. So in 2009, this animal, Tianyulong, was published from the what was then thought to be the early Cretaceous of China. It's now understood that this actually comes from the mid to late Jurassic of China, but it's known from several skeletons. So what you've got here is you've got a skull up at the top right. You've got part of the shoulder girdle in here, and part of the pelvis and tail here, and then you've got one of the hind limbs here. Other specimens consist of more complete skeletons. Again, this is a very small animal, so this is probably less than 1 meter in length, so 2 to 3 foot in length. And it's clearly a Heterodontosaurid. So it demonstrates that Heterodontosaurids were not just in South Africa and Europe, but also in Asia, in the Jurassic. But really one of the outstanding features of Tianyulong is it has this soft tissue preserved, these hair-like, very long structures preserved along the back. So over the tail and pelvic region of this animal. And other specimens of Tianyulong also show these hair-like structures in other parts of along other parts of the backbone as well. And these are believed to be homologous, to be essentially the same, in an evolutionary sense, the same structures as protofeathers. the covering of hair-like structures that you see on some carnivorous dinosaurs that ultimately evolved into birds. So this discovery led to the idea that perhaps all dinosaurs primitively might have been covered with this hair-like, had this covering of hair-like structures, which are the evolutionary precursors of feathers. So a very significant discovery when this was made just over a decade ago. We also have now a South American Heterodontosaurid, again, very, very small bodied, again, probably, again, 2 to 3 meters in length. This was given the name Fruitadens. This comes from the Middle Jurassic of Argentina and is known from some really nice material. So we've got a couple of different reconstructions of the skull of that animal shown on this slide here. And Heterodontosaurids are enigmatic in lots of ways. There's lots of questions about their biology that are really unresolved. But one of the big questions is about where they fit into the evolutionary tree of Ornithischian dinosaurs. So this is a really simplified evolutionary tree of dinosaurs. We have a split at the bottom of dinosaurs into Ornithischians and Saurischians, the lizard-hipped dinosaurs, which include the long-necked sauropodomorphs and theropods. And this is the lineage that gives rise to birds, of course. And on the other branch, we have the Ornithischians. And Ornithischians have these 5 major groupings. The ankylosaurs and the stegosaurs are grouped together within Thyreophora, the armored dinosaurs. We have the ornithopods, and then we have the horned dinosaurs and the domed dinosaurs, the bone-headed dinosaurs, grouped together within the marginous cephalians. And for a long time, Heterodontosaurids were thought to be part of this group called ornithopods that include the hadrosaurs. That was a conventional picture really from about the 1970s through until the early part of the 21st century. So the last 15 years or so. And then people began to reinterpret the evolutionary position of Heterodontosaurids. There was a hypothesis that Heterodontosaurids might actually be more closely related to the marginous cephalians, the dome-headed and the horned dinosaurs. And then in my PhD back in 2006, I suggested actually they might fit somewhere much more closer to the base of the evolutionary radiation of dinosaurs. So I actually suggested that they might be the most primitive group of Ornithischian dinosaurs, radiating somewhere right down at the base before the origins of all of these other major groups. That is a view that has been relatively widely accepted, but there's still quite a lot of controversy. So I think at the moment there's an active debate about whether Heterodontosaurids fit right down at the base of Ornithischians or whether they're related to the Pachycephalosaurs and the Ceratopsians. Okay, so this brings us to Fruita. This is, of course, the Fruita paleontological area. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. A spectacular place to visit. Amazing exposures of the late Jurassic Morrison Formation, and famous worldwide for its incredibly important assemblage of late Jurassic terrestrial tetrapods. It's particularly famous for yielding remarkable fossil material of small vertebrates from the time of the age of dinosaurs, including early mammals, including groups of lizard relatives, and including very small dinosaurs. The fossils from Fruita were first discovered, and many of the most important ones were excavated by field teams led by George Callison, shown on the right of the slide. Again, I'm sure this is someone who's very familiar to very many of you. Someone who I got a chance to meet a few years back when I visited with my colleague, Susie Maidman from the Natural History Museum in London. And George took us out to Fruita Paleontological Area. George and his field crews from California State University excavated many of these really important fossils in the late 70s and early 80s, and really discovered and documented this incredibly important fauna. And of course, because many of the fossils are very small, the way that they were discovered is by searching through microsites, so really getting very close to the ground. And this I think, is the site at which Fruitadens, the animal I'm going to talk about in a moment, was discovered back in the 1970s. So one of the important animals that George Callison's team collected in the late 70s and the early 80s were fossils of a really, really tiny Ornithischian dinosaur. These fossils are now in the LA County Museum in Los Angeles. There are parts of at least 4 individuals of a tiny, tiny Ornithischian dinosaur. So you can see this is a lower jaw with 5 teeth in situ, but it's really very, very small in size. It was quite early on recognized as being a very primitive Ornithischian in terms of its dental morphology, in terms of the shape of its teeth. It was thought to potentially represent the same genus as this Heterodontosaurid from the United Kingdom, Echinodon. So it was initially identified as potentially a new species of Echinodon. And then just over a decade ago, I led the naming of this species. So I became involved in working on this material about 15 years ago, and we named it actually as a completely new genus and species, and we gave it the name Fruitadens, fruited tooth. And this is particularly significant because it was the first Heterodontosaurid to be described from North America. So this is some of the material that we have of Fruitadens. It is quite incomplete and quite fragmentary material. It's not the best preserved material I've ever worked with, but it has some really important and significant parts of the skeleton. So we have a number of different jaws. So we have upper jaws, maxillae, and we have lower jaws, the dentaries, and many of these have quite well preserved teeth in situ, and those show us the typical Ornithischian nature of the dentition. So they have these kind of triangular leaf-shaped teeth with large denticles along the front and rear surfaces. We also have parts of the hind limbs. So what you can see on this slide are parts of the upper leg bone, the femur. So this is part of the head of the femur. This is the part that would have fit into the hip joint, the hip socket. And then we have part of the lower leg bone, the tibia and fibula, and then we have the astragalus and calcaneum, the ankle bones, which are in Heterodontosaurids and in Fruitadens are fused together. So they actually the ankle bones are fused to the lower leg bones. And these have many features which are very characteristic for Heterodontosaurids and look quite unlike other groups of Ornithischian dinosaurs. And those include details of the dentition. For example, there is a caniniform tooth. It's not very well preserved, but there is a caniniform tooth at the front of the lower jaw, and details of the hind limbs as well, including that fusion of the lower part of the hind limb that I mentioned. So it's quite distinctive in its anatomy. It has features that are distinct from other Heterodontosaurids that clearly indicate that it's a new species, but it very clearly belongs to Heterodontosaurids. One of the things we did as part of the work on this material was we CT scanned it, and my colleague Laura Porro, who's currently at the University College London, took the data that we got from CT scanning, from X-ray imaging this, and processed it, and it allowed us to look inside the jaws. So what we've got here are reconstructions of the upper and lower jaws, in which the jaws have basically been made see-through, and we can see the teeth inside the jaws. So the teeth are in yellow, and then the replacement teeth, which weren't really visible from the external surface, but so those teeth that are coming through and replacing the functional teeth are shown in orange. And then shown in red are some of the internal canals within the bone that would have supplied blood to the bases of these teeth. So we can see very clearly the nature of the dentition using this approach. We can see this caniniform tooth, which was directed forwards rather than directed upwards. We can see that. We can see the replacement teeth. We can see some variation in size. We can see features that allow us to recognize both that this is a Heterodontosaurid and that it is distinct from other Heterodontosaurids that are known at present. And we also have a skull reconstruction at the moment at the bottom here, showing how these different bones fit into the overall skull of this animal. One of the things that's very interesting about Fruitadens, of course, is its size. It is a very, very small animal. We wanted to know whether that was because these were juvenile individuals, so these were animals that were really very early on in the lifespan of this animal, or if actually this was an animal that was very small as an adult as well. So what we did, and this was work that was conducted by my colleague Greg Erickson, was we cut open one of the femora, the upper leg bones, and we looked at the internal histology. So what you've got here is a cross section through the internal anatomy of that femur, and you can see a number of features in. So we did this for two specimens. You can see features in this bone that allow us to determine the growth was beginning to slow at the time that this animal died. So some of the bone structure around the edge of the bone shows indication of slowing growth. We can also see what are known as lines of arrested growth. These are periods during the life of the animal in which growth slowed. And those are shown by the arrows here. And those were laid down on an annual basis. So we're also able to estimate the age of the animal at death. And for the largest animal, for the largest specimen that we looked at, there are 4 of those lines of arrested growth, those annual lines, suggesting that this animal was in its 5th year of life when it died. So we suggested when we published this specimen that this was an animal that probably wouldn't have grown substantially more. It's an animal that is perhaps 65 to 75 centimeters in length. That's about just over 2 foot in length. This is probably the smallest ornithischian dinosaur known, certainly the smallest ornithischian dinosaur from North America. That makes it the smallest plant-eating dinosaur from North America, and potentially the smallest plant-eating dinosaur known from anywhere in the world. And we did estimate the mass of this as well. It's less than a kilo in mass. It's about 1.55 pounds. So really small, really dinky animal, could actually literally sit on the palm of your hand. Of course, I'm sure you know much of this already. This is a life reconstruction of Fruitadens on display at the Dinosaur Journey Museum. I was able to visit a couple of years back. I was very excited to see this on display and to see our paper on display in the museum. But I think it is an enormously important and significant taxon, not just because it's small, but I think it also hints at there being perhaps an entire diversity of small-bodied dinosaurs that we, as yet, don't really understand. So we have teeth that look like teeth of Fruitadens and are very small from various other places in the world, but often we only have teeth preserved, and it's not really enough for us to understand what the diversity of these small-bodied dinosaurs was like. So it's actually possible that many parts of the world had small-bodied dinosaurs like Fruitadens, and we haven't discovered them yet. So they're not well preserved in the fossil record. They're not easy for us to identify. And so Fruitadens, I think, gives us a bit of a window into what actually might be a very diverse and important part of dinosaur ecosystems we don't yet fully understand. This shows the distribution of Heterodontosaurids across the world, and also the interrelationships within the groups. So there's an evolutionary tree on the left. It's taken from a paper by Paul Serino. It suggests that Fruitadens is closely related to Echinodon, this Heterodontosaurid from the earliest Cretaceous of the UK, and Tianulong, this Heterodontosaurid with soft tissue preserved from China. And on the right-hand side, you can see that we now have Heterodontosaurids from many parts of the world, really from all over the world. So this suggests they really were a global radiation. They were present in North America, in Europe, Asia, South America, and Africa. And there is actually another Heterodontosaurid species known from North America, which has not yet been published. So there is a specimen of a Heterodontosaurid known from the early Jurassic of the Kayenta Formation in Arizona, actually discovered back in the 1980s, almost as early as Fruitadens, but still awaiting publication. So there will be at some point in the not too distant future, hopefully, a second Heterodontosaurid species from North America. Okay, I'm going to move on from Fruitadens I'm going to move on to talk a bit about a new discovery. And this is just to say that the specimen I'm going to show you is not going to be published for a couple of weeks. So please don't please refrain from talking about it on social media for the time being. But it will be out in a couple of weeks, and there'll be media and so on. So hopefully you'll be able to see the paper before long. So this is another Heterodontosaurid specimen that comes from South Africa. It was discovered recently by this man. This is Billy de Klerk. He's the or was the curator of paleontology at the Albany Museum in Grahamstown in South Africa. And this is Billy de Klerk at a locality in the early Jurassic of South Africa, from which he collected this new Heterodontosaurid specimen. And this is in a sequence of rocks called the Elliott Formation, which is quite famous for its dinosaur discoveries. And it's where the original discoveries of Heterodontosaurids were made in the 1960s. So the work I'm going to talk about, this new specimen, I'm involved in it, but I'm really not the lead. There's a large team of people involved, and really the lead on the work is Victor Rademacher, who completed his master's thesis at Wits University in South Africa on this new specimen. He was supervised during that research by Jonah Chouanier, who is a professor at Wits University. He's an American paleontologist who's been working in South Africa for a number of years now, specializing on the Elliott Formation. So this work was really led by Victor and Jonah, brought me in to be involved as well. Other people involved, there's actually a large team, but other key people involved include Emma Schachner, who's an American paleontologist, specializes on breathing mechanisms in living and fossil vertebrates. And then Vincent Fernandez, who's a French imaging specialist and vertebrate paleontologist, currently based at the Natural History Museum in London, and really an amazing expert at analyzing X-ray data. So this is the new specimen. This was collected within the last decade or so. It's a remarkably complete skeleton of Heterodontosaurus. It has the beautiful skull that you can see at the top right of the screen. I'll show you a close-up of that in a second. And then most of the skeleton, actually there are a couple more blocks that fit on at the bottom here that have preserved more of the hind limbs that I haven't got in this image. But you can see this is the shoulder blade, the scapula. You've got the forelimb here. You've got the pelvis here, and then the hind limbs here. And then in here, we've got the vertebra, the backbone, and some of the rib cage as well. And a few years ago, Billy de Klerk sent me these photographs, and something leapt out to me immediately in this region of the skeleton and got me extremely excited. And I'll come back to talk about what this is in a second. But you can see, I hope, that there are a series of very small, thin, slender bones present in this part of the skeleton here. This is the skull of this new specimen. It's very nice, as you can see, complete, very characteristic of Heterodontosaurus and Heterodontosaurids in general. So you can see this enlarged caniniform tooth in the dentary, which fits into this gap in the upper skull between the premaxilla and the maxillary bones. And then we have this tightly packed battery of grinding teeth behind that would have been used to break down vegetation. So it's a very, very nice specimen, but actually quite similar to other specimens of Heterodontosaurus that are already known. Doesn't necessarily provide us with a lot of new information on the cranial anatomy. So Jonah took this specimen. Jonah and his team took this specimen to Grenoble in France to get its synchrotron scans. So they put this in a very, very powerful X-ray scanner, essentially. This is Vincent Fernandez on the right, helping or actually operating the scanner. So this is them setting up to be synchrotron scans. And this is the team working on the specimen in Grenoble. So we've got Vincent Fernandez, Jonah, Kimi Chappell, who's one of the grad students of Jonah, and Kathleen Dolman. So these are also people who are involved in this research. And what they're looking at in this image are some of the initial images coming out of the synchrotron scanning of this specimen. So what that synchrotron scanning allowed was, after some very painstaking work by Victor Rademacher, was this segmentation of the skeleton. So on the right here, you've got the specimen as preserved in the slabs, and then on the left, you can see the result of Victor's amazing work is extracting these individual bones from the rocks surrounding them using the X-ray images. So this allows us to look inside the rock and to understand the anatomy of the skeleton. And the focus has really been on the postcranial skeleton. So the focus has not been on the skull, because most of the really interesting features of this new specimen are actually in the postcranial skeleton, and particularly in the area of the rib cage. And so the paper that we've got coming out in a couple of weeks from now really focuses on that part of the skeleton and what it tells us about this dinosaur, and also a bit about Heterodontosaurids and how they might have functioned, what their biology was like. So here's a close-up of one part of that skeleton, and it's a close-up of those features that I mentioned a few slides back when I pointed out these long, thin, slender bones present within the kind of the abdomen of this animal. So you can see these bones shown in blue here, and these are Gastralia. Gastralia are, that's the technical term for belly ribs. These are present within the rib cage, or in the abdomen, base of the abdomen in crocodilians today, also many groups of dinosaurs. I'll show you an example of what they look like in Tyrannosaurus rex in a couple of slides' time. But the reason I was excited to see these in this specimen was that these have never been found in Ornithischian dinosaurs before. So this is a completely new discovery. They had been thought to be completely lost in Ornithischian dinosaurs. And they're actually quite important from a paleobiological point of view. And they also support the idea that Heterodontosaurids are really a very primitive group of Ornithischian dinosaurs. They're the only group of Ornithischians that we know have retained this feature within their skeletons. There are other features of the kind of the rib cage area that are quite unusual as well. So we have, as part of the shoulder girdle, we have a clavicle preserved. It's not shown on this slide actually, but there is a clavicle preserved, and the clavicle is the wishbone of birds, where you have two clavicles in primitive reptiles. In birds, they're fused into a single bone. Clavicles, again, are really almost unknown in Ornithischian dinosaurs, and were thought to be lost in Ornithischian dinosaurs, but are present in Heterodontosaurus, this specimen shows, suggesting again that this might be something that supports the idea that Heterodontosaurids are very primitive Ornithischians. We also have sternal plates preserved, so the breastbone. Again, these are very rare in Ornithischians, and they have quite an unusual morphology in Heterodontosaurus. And then we have these other bones preserved here next to the sternal plates, which have got the labels R1, R2, R3 here. And these are, again, quite unusual bones that are not present in most Ornithischians. These are ossifications of these are known as ossified sternal ribs. So normally these are cartilaginous structures that connect between the sternum and the rib cage in tetrapods, but they're not normally ossified into bone. And in a very small number of Ornithischian dinosaurs, including Heterodontosaurus, these are ossified into bone. And it tells us something about the stiffening of that part of the rib cage. So I said that the presence of these Gastralia tells us something about Ornithischian and Heterodontosaurid biology, and it's really about breathing mechanisms in this group of dinosaurs. And for a long time, a really unsolved and outstanding question is around how Ornithischian dinosaurs were able to breathe. And the reason this is a long-standing and unresolved question is that they have many unusual anatomical features that differ from other groups of dinosaurs where we understand breathing mechanisms and how the lungs were ventilated, so how air was pumped in and out of the lungs. So this is a dinosaur I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is Sue, the Tyrannosaurus rex from the Field Museum. I said I was going to show Gastralia and another dinosaur. So these are the belly ribs, Gastralia, present in Sioux. You can see that they are present across much of the base of the abdomen of this animal. And Gastralia actually are believed to have had quite an important function in theropod dinosaurs, in other groups of reptiles more primitively, in ventilating the lung during breathing, so in pumping air in and out of the lung during breathing. So what we've got on the right-hand side of the screen here are the gastralia of a theropod dinosaur, shown during breathing in and breathing out. So in is on the right, and breathing out is on the left. And on what you've got on the left of the screen here is you can see the gastralia. We've got the pelvis here, and then we've got the tail of the animal here, and we've got a muscle which connects between the gastralia and the tail. And the idea is that these gastralia in theropod dinosaurs, these belly ribs, were actually mobile, so they were able to move, and that they were moved by this muscle that ran from the tail to the back of the gastralia. And what happened is that when the animal breathed in, this muscle contracts, it pulls the gastralia back, and it expands the abdomen. And then when the animal breathes out, that muscle relaxes, the gastralia move inwards, and that helps to pump air back out of the lungs. So these gastralia have a function in expanding, contracting the abdomen, pumping air in and out of the lungs. The absence of gastralia in ornithischians indicates that this was not a primary mechanism of pumping air in and out of the lungs for most members of the group, but it's been very unclear how ornithischians did that, so how ornithischians did pump air in and out of the lungs, how they ventilated their lungs during respiration. And you can see, if you look at a skeleton of something like Stegosaurus, we don't have gastralia in the abdominal region. And we also don't have other features that are present in other groups of dinosaurs that suggest that parts of a bird-like respiratory system were present. So really, ornithischian respiration has been very, very enigmatic and poorly understood. So the discovery of gastralia in this very early primitive ornithischian dinosaur changes our model of ornithischian breathing, allows us to reassess how at least the very earliest members of ornithischian may have breathed, and gives us insights into later evolution of breathing within the group. So this is a reconstruction that Victor prepared of Heterodontosaurus, showing these various features of the kind of the abdominal region. So we've got these are the sternal ribs connecting from the sternum to the rib cage here. So these ossified sternal ribs, and here we've got the gastralia. And so it seems that in primitive ornithischian dinosaurs, there is this potential that the gastralia could have functioned to help ventilate the lungs, to help drive air in and out of the lungs during breathing. But we also propose that there may have been a unique muscle present in ornithischian dinosaurs, shown here, which connected between the front of the pelvis and the back of the lung, and also had a role in ventilating the lung, in driving air in and out of the lung during the breathing cycle. So in early ornithischian dinosaurs like Heterodontosaurus, there may have been a combination of both the primitive reptile condition where gastralia are important in driving ventilation of the lung, and also this unique muscle which were connected to the pelvis. And then in later ornithischians, we have the complete loss of gastralia. So this mechanism of gastralia pumping air in and out of the lungs is no longer significant, but we have potentially the enlargement of this muscle connecting between the lung and the front of the pelvis, which would have been important in pumping air in and out of the lung and ventilating the lung during that breathing cycle. So there's still a lot of gaps in our understanding of ornithischian breathing, but the discovery of these gastralia, although they seem like a really minor feature in this new Heterodontosaurus specimen, actually allow us to start asking or answering questions about how ornithischian breeding mechanisms evolved during the evolution of the group. I'm going to stop there. I've definitely talked for too long, but I'm very happy to answer any questions you've got about ornithischians or breeding mechanisms or anything else you might want to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Butler, for that great presentation. If you have questions, please throw them into the chat and we will answer them on screen for everybody. I have a question, so I'm going to kick us off here. In Heterodontosaurids, there has been the suggestion that they started off as specialist herbivores, and then throughout their evolutionary history, they became more generalistic feeders. Did you happen to see a continuation of that in the new specimen, or did it reverse that hypothesis?
So the new specimen it's very similar to other specimens of Heterodontosaurus. It has this very specialized grinding dentition, which suggests that this is predominantly a plant eater. There is some controversy about the evolution of Heterodontosaurid diets, because we have some animals like Fruitadens and Echinodon that have much less specialized dentitions, and that perhaps were more generalists. And it's unclear which is the primitive condition. So I would say at the moment, we don't know if they were primitively quite specialized plant eaters and then became more generalized, which would be quite interesting. It would be quite a unique pattern to see. We don't tend to see that pattern from specialized to generalized very often, or if actually it's the other way around. And I think part of the problem is that we have potentially very large gaps in our understanding of the group, very large gaps in the fossil record, because these things are so small, they're quite difficult to preserve and they're quite difficult for us to find. So we probably don't really know exactly what the correct order of acquisition of dietary characteristics is. So what is primitive? What's the primitive condition? Were they primitively generalists or were they primitively specialists? We don't know.
Cool. All right, I'm seeing it pretty quiet in the chat, so I'm going to take that opportunity to ask one more question. So since they're so poorly preserved in the fossil record, but we seem to have lots of jaws, which makes sense because teeth are so hyper mineralized, they last a long time in the fossil record. Is there anything in their bone histology or in their postcranial anatomy that would contribute to a taphonomic bias against their preservation?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the big issue is that they are very, very small. And so small body dinosaurs generally don't preserve well. And they perhaps weren't typically inhabiting the environments in which some of these small-bodied theropods are commonly preserved. So we do have small-bodied theropods abundantly preserved in China in the early Cretaceous. We have them in other parts of the world. So in Solnhofen in the late Jurassic of Germany, we find small-bodied theropod dinosaurs. But we very rarely have Heterodontosaurids in the same deposits. We obviously do have some Tianulong from China, but then they're rare. So they probably perhaps weren't inhabiting the same environments. So maybe there's an environmental thing that they're not typically found in environments that preserve small-bodied animals well. And then the other thing is that even if we've got their fossil remains, unless we have the right parts of the skeleton, they might be quite difficult for us to identify. So if we just have isolated teeth that look like those of Fruitadens, we probably wouldn't know that they were Heterodontosaurid. We'd know they were Ornithischian, but we wouldn't know they were Heterodontosaurid. And the same is true for many other parts of the skeleton. We could have isolated vertebrae, and we probably wouldn't be able to identify them as Heterodontosaurid rather than another group of Ornithischians. So I think there's a variety of challenges. We have to get probably the right kind of environment to preserve these small-bodied things, but also the right parts of the skeleton preserved when we have those settings.
Thanks. All right, we got a question in the chat. How early on did Ornithischian end up losing Gastralia? Was there a major reason you think it would have been advantageous to do so as the Mesozoic went on?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the only Ornithischian we know of with Gastralia now is Heterodontosaurus, which is from the early Jurassic. It's possible that some other early Jurassic Ornithischians had Gastralia, and we we don't know that yet because the skeletons aren't well enough preserved. These are really delicate, tiny structures. So we have to have really exceptionally preserved specimen to identify them. So it could be that they were more widespread, but it seems that certainly by the middle Jurassic, we don't really have any evidence at all, even in well-preserved specimens, that they were present. So I think they were probably gone from ornithischians, certainly by the end of the early Jurassic. And this seems to be, our hypothesis we put forward in this paper is that this is related to the enlargement of this muscle that we postulate was involved in ventilating the lung that connected from the rear part of the lung to the pelvic girdle. And that becomes an alternative way of ventilating the lung, so that the need to have gastralia to pump air in and out of the lung is no longer there, so that they become redundant and are lost. So that's the hypothesis that we put forward for why these things are lost, but it's a hypothesis, and we need to test this with further discoveries, particularly of well-preserved ornithischians from the early part of the Mesozoic.
Cool. All right, we have a question from Brandon. Thank you for a really interesting talk. Do you have any upcoming plans for field work in South Africa and any new avenues of research that you would like to look for there?
I would absolutely love to be able to get to South Africa. At the moment, we're not allowed to go for obvious reasons. And so for the last 2 years, I've been supposed to be going to South Africa. We have a very, very exciting field program in South Africa at the moment, working together with Jonah, who I talked about a bit in the presentation. And we're working there primarily in the late Triassic. And we've got some spectacular new sites really at the very base of the Elliott Formation in the early part of the late Triassic that are going to tell us a lot about dinosaur evolution in that part of the world during the Triassic. We just have to be able to get there to dig up some of the specimens. But hopefully next year we're going to be going back to South Africa. And so that's really where my focus will be in the future. But there's a lot to be done still in South Africa, enormous potential for new discoveries.
All right. And Zach asked, he says, first off, thank you for this talk. It's been eye-opening. Do you have any idea how many small-bodied dinosaurs may have been present in their ecosystems, both in terms of overall presence and diversity of species?
It's a really good question, and it's a question that I don't have a very good answer to. But I think almost certainly we're dramatically underestimating the diversity of small dinosaurs. It's pretty much a universal pattern today, and dinosaurs might have been a bit different from this, but for most groups of animals today, most species are small within that group. So you have many more small-bodied species, and then as you get towards larger sizes, the number of species becomes smaller. So we would predict, if dinosaurs follow that general pattern, and they might be a bit different, but we would predict that there should be lots of small-bodied dinosaurs out there. And not just animals that are a couple of meters in length. There should be animals that are really small, as in 50, a couple of foot up to 4 foot in length. But we don't have those, or we don't have many of those. We have them for theropod dinosaurs, where we have exceptional sites, such as in early Cretaceous China. We actually find there's a huge diversity of those small-bodied dinosaurs. And it's probably also the case for ornithischian dinosaurs. So I don't have a good answer, but I think there probably is a very substantial diversity that we are not, we just can't, we're not finding at the moment. I know there are in the UK, in the Middle Jurassic, we have microsites, so sites that preserve isolated and very small bony remains. And there are thousands of tiny ornithischian teeth within those microsites, literally thousands. But they all have this kind of quite generalized morphology, and it's very difficult to tell how many species were present. So it could be that those represent, dozens of species potentially, but we don't know at this point. So I think this is a big challenge for understanding dinosaur ecosystems, actually, is understanding how many small-bodied dinosaurs we might be missing.
All right, if there are any more questions, please throw them into the chat. I do have one more question. Since you mentioned the Elliott Formation, how big is your search detector going to be for, say, Lusutosaurus with Gastralia in the Elliott Formation when you're down there working?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so the Lasutosaurus, for those of you not who might not be so familiar with it, is a well-known early ornithischian dinosaur from South Africa, from the Elliott Formation, lived alongside Heterodontosaurus. One of the most important, provides us with some of the most important insights into early ornithischian dinosaur evolution. It's known from quite a lot of specimens, but none of them are really exceptionally preserved. So we do have some very, very nice skull material, but we don't have specimens that are preserved in articulation in the way that this Heterodontosaurus specimen is. So we think it didn't have Gastralia, but we don't know that for sure. And actually, I think it's quite possible that Gastralia were present in the Lasutosaurus. So I think it's absolutely the case that if we were to find a beautiful articulated specimen of Lasutosaurus similar to those, this new one that we've got for Heterodontosaurus, that could change our understanding of what the breathing mechanisms were in that animal and other similar small-bodied ornithischians. So certainly that's something that we should be looking out for in the future.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. So if anybody has any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can answer them via email, absolutely. But we'd love to thank Dr. Butler for sharing his time with us this evening, his time, our afternoon, our time. And thank you for sharing your upcoming research. We look forward to the paper coming out.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation and the questions. A really interesting discussion. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you again.
You're welcome. All right, and thank you guys for joining us. And within a couple weeks, we will have the video of this sent out to the participants. So we're going to wait for the paper to come out first. But thank you for joining us, and we'll be back at 6:30 with our final lecture for our Dinosaur Days series.